There's a story that sounds almost too simple to matter. A man saves $5 a day, not 50, not 500, just 5. No big investment strategy, no sudden windfall, no risky moves. Just a small, almost forgettable decision repeated every single day. And if you heard that, your first instinct would probably be the same as most people's. That's nothing, because $5 doesn't feel like progress. It doesn't feel like it's changing your life. It barely feels noticeable. It's the kind of amount you wouldn't even think twice about spending. A coffee, a snack, a quick purchase you forget about by the end of the day. So saving it instead doesn't feel powerful. It feels insignificant. And that's exactly why most people never take it seriously. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. This man didn't do it for a week, or a month, or even a year. He did it for 40 years. Same small decision, repeated again and again and again, through boring days, through stressful periods, through moments where it probably felt pointless. No excitement, no instant results, no visible reward in the beginning, just consistency. And somewhere along the way, something strange starts to happen. That small, insignificant action begins to separate him from everyone else. Not because he was smarter, not because he earned more, but because he kept doing something that almost nobody else was willing to keep doing. And if you're being honest, that's the part most people fail at. Not the saving, the repeating. The problem is, most people don't fail because they're bad with money. They fail because they're chasing the wrong kind of progress. We've been trained to look for big moves, big salaries, big investments, big breakthroughs that suddenly change everything. It feels logical. If you want a big result, you need a big action. So when something small shows up, like saving $5 a day, your brain almost dismisses it instantly. What's the point? And that question sounds reasonable, but it's also the exact thought process that keeps people stuck. Because big changes are exciting, but they're rare. And more importantly, they're hard to sustain. A sudden burst of motivation might make you save aggressively for a month, maybe even 3. But eventually, life catches up. Expenses show up. Discipline fades. And you fall back to where you started. Not because you're lazy, because you were relying on intensity instead of consistency. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Small actions don't feel powerful in the moment, so they get ignored. But big actions feel powerful, even when they don't last. So people keep repeating the same cycle. They wait for the right time to take things seriously. They plan to start when they earn more. They think they'll fix everything with one big decision. But the man saving $5 a day, he wasn't waiting for the perfect moment. He wasn't trying to change his entire life overnight. He just picked something small enough that he could keep going. And that's the part most people misunderstand. It's not about how much you start with. It's about choosing something you won't stop. Here's where it gets deeper and a little uncomfortable, because what that man was really building wasn't just savings. He was building an identity. When you repeat a small action every single day, something shifts internally. At first, it feels like effort. You have to remind yourself. You have to stay conscious. It almost feels forced. But over time, that friction starts to disappear. It stops feeling like something you're trying to do and starts feeling like something you just do. And that's a completely different game. Most people think discipline is about pushing yourself harder, but real discipline doesn't feel like constant resistance. It feels automatic, like brushing your teeth. You don't wake up every day and debate whether you should do it. You just do it. That's what consistency does. It removes the need for motivation. Now compare that to how most people approach money. They rely on moods, on motivation, on temporary bursts of inspiration after watching a video or reading something impactful. And for a short time, it works. But then life gets busy, energy drops, focus shifts, and the habit disappears. Not because they didn't care, but because it never became part of who they were. The man saving $5 a day didn't wake up every morning feeling inspired. He didn't need to, because at some point, it stopped being a decision. It became a standard. And once something becomes your standard, you stop negotiating with it. You don't ask, should I save today? You just do it. That's the quiet advantage most people never build. And it's the reason small habits, repeated long enough, start to outperform big intentions that never stick. And then there's something even more deceptive happening in the background. Time. Not the dramatic kind you notice, but the quiet kind that passes without asking for your attention. Because in the beginning, nothing looks different. A week goes by, maybe a month, even a year. And if you looked at that man's savings during that time, it wouldn't impress you. It wouldn't feel like progress worth celebrating. And that's exactly where most people quit. They expect effort to create visible results quickly. And when it doesn't, they assume it's not working. But money doesn't grow in a straight line. It grows slowly and then suddenly. At first, it's just your own effort. Just the $5 you're putting in every day. Nothing magical about it. But over time, something starts to shift. The money you've already saved begins to do a small part of the work for you, then a little more. And eventually, you reach a point where your money is contributing almost as much as you are. That's the part no one sees coming, because it takes years of invisible progress before it becomes visible, and most people never stay long enough to experience that shift. They stop right before things start getting interesting. The man saving $5 a day didn't see explosive growth in the first few years. But he stayed through the slow phase, through the boring phase, through the phase where it felt like nothing was happening. And that patience is what allowed time to finally catch up with him. Because when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It just compounds. And then, somewhere along that timeline, things stop feeling small, not overnight, not in some dramatic movie-like moment, but gradually, almost quietly, the numbers start to look different. What once felt like just a few dollars turns into something you can't ignore anymore. You check your savings, and it's not a few hundred. It's not even just a few thousand. It's something real, something that actually changes how you feel about money. And that's the turning point most people never reach. Because this is where the story flips. In the beginning, you're carrying the habit. You're putting in the effort. You're doing all the work. It feels slow, sometimes even pointless. But now, the habit starts carrying you. Because once that base is built, everything becomes easier. Saving doesn't feel like sacrifice anymore. It feels like protection. It feels like control. You're not stressed about every small expense. You're not constantly reacting to money problems. There's a quiet stability that starts to show up in your life. And it didn't come from one big decision. It came from thousands of small ones. That's what makes this moment so powerful. Not the amount itself, but what it represents. Proof. Proof that something simple actually worked. Proof that consistency wasn't a waste of time. And maybe the most important part, proof that you were capable of sticking with something longer than most people ever do. Because once you see that, you stop underestimating small actions and you start respecting them. So what do you actually take from a story like this? Because it's easy to listen, nod your head, and then go right back to doing things the same way. And honestly, that's what most people do. They treat stories like this as inspiration instead of instruction. But if you strip everything down, the lesson isn't complicated. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need a high income to start. And you definitely don't need to feel ready. What you need is something small enough that you won't resist it. That's the part people get wrong. They try to change everything at once, cut all expenses, save aggressively, track every rupee. And for a short time, it works. Until it doesn't, because the goal wasn't built to last. The man saving $5 a day didn't choose an amount that impressed people. He chose an amount he could repeat without friction. And that's a completely different mindset. Instead of asking, how much can I save? The better question is, what can I save consistently, even on a bad day? Because your worst days are what define your habits, not your best ones. If your system only works when you're motivated, it's not a system, it's a phase. And phases don't build anything long-term. So the real takeaway isn't about the number, it's about lowering the barrier so much that stopping feels harder than continuing. That's how something small survives long enough to become something meaningful, not by being impressive, but by being repeatable. Now let's make this real. Because this is where most people overcomplicate things again. They hear an idea like this and immediately try to optimize it. What's the best amount? Where should I invest it? How do I maximize returns? And without realizing it, they've already drifted away from the point. Because the power here was never in optimization. It was in repetition. So instead of trying to build the perfect system, focus on building a system you won't break. Make the action automatic, not something you decide every day, but something that happens whether you feel like it or not. Maybe it's a fixed amount that leaves your account the moment money comes in. Maybe it's a rule you follow without exception, no matter how small the amount feels. The exact method doesn't matter. What matters is removing the daily negotiation, because that's where people lose. Every time you ask yourself, should I do this today? You're creating a chance to fail, and most days, you will. Not because you lack discipline, but because decision fatigue is real. The man saving $5 a day didn't rely on willpower for 40 years. That would be impossible. He relied on simplicity, on a system so easy, it didn't require energy. And that's what you should be aiming for. Not a habit that looks impressive on paper, but one that survives your worst moods, your busiest days, and your lowest motivation. Because if it can survive that, it can survive anything. And when you step back and look at the full picture, it almost feels strange. Not because the strategy was complicated, but because it wasn't. A small amount, repeated daily, over a long period of time. That's it. No secrets, no shortcuts, no hidden advantage. And yet, almost nobody follows through long enough to see where it leads. Not because it doesn't work, but because it doesn't feel like it's working until it already has. That's the quiet trap. We chase what looks effective in the moment and ignore what actually is. The man who saved $5 a day didn't outperform others because he had better opportunities. He outlasted them. While others stopped, restarted, changed strategies, or waited for the right time, He just kept going, and in the end, that made all the difference. So if there's one thing worth sitting with after this, it's not the amount. It's the question you probably haven't asked yourself honestly. Are you choosing actions that look powerful or actions you can actually sustain? Because your future won't be built by what you do once in a while. It will be built by what you repeat, even when it feels insignificant. And in the next video, we're going to look at the opposite side of this. Not the habit that builds wealth slowly, but the one that quietly destroys it without you even noticing.